Welcome to From Clinical to Entrepreneurial, OT Private Practice Journeys, an Ontario Society of Occupational Therapists podcast. In this series, we connect with occupational therapists, private practitioners, and business owners, and we hear about their inspiration, their stories, and their lessons learned. I'm Seema Santwani, OSOT's Director of Strategic Partnerships and Practice. In this episode, my co-host Shari and I connect with Michelle Lehman, an OT who in 2021, while working as a research occupational therapist, witnessed a surge of requests from therapists seeking access to interventions that might help clients living with chronic conditions. What started as a networking concept, Think Self-Management, is now an international hub for evidence-based programming and research commercialization. For OTs interested in entrepreneurship, product development, or health tech, Michelle's story is an inspiring look at how innovation, business, and occupational therapy can intersect to create something truly impactful. Hello, Michelle. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
It's great to have you on our podcast. I had the pleasure of meeting you at a conference last year. And after making that connection, we thought it would be great to have you on our podcast. And so why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about you, where you're from. We're pleased to have a non-Ontario-based OT join us for this episode. So let us know a little bit about you, where you're from, and how you started your occupational therapy career.
Yeah, so I'm from Nova Scotia, specifically from Dartmouth, and I went to U of T for my occupational therapy degree. So I was in Ontario for a bit, got a little bit of a taste of Ontario. And then I finished up my OT degree in like the spring, summer of 2020. So I was kind of that first COVID cohort.
Yikes.
And so when I finished up my last two placements, they were virtual because it was, May 2020.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel ready to start a full-on occupational therapy caseload. So I was looking for kind of maybe more role emerging roles when I started applying. And I came across a research occupational therapy position at Dalhousie, which is a university here in Halifax. They also have an OT program. So that kind of felt really perfect because I was very comfortable with research. And
did you have a research history?
Yeah, so I didn't do like a research master's or anything.
Okay.
But I did a research, integrated science program at Dalhousie for my undergrad. So I did like a first-year thesis, a third-year thesis, and then an honors thesis. And then obviously we do our research project in OT school.
Yeah.
And I thought I wanted to do research during my undergrad. I thought that's what I wanted to do. And I think I still kind of thought that at the end of my master's. And so I felt comfortable. It was all part of RCTs. So it was, still working with clients, building my confidence working with clients, but within a box, right? Like within, this is a specific intervention we're delivering. So it felt much more comfortable for me coming out of OT school with my last two placements, they were great. I learned a lot, but I still just felt a little bit uncomfortable. I wasn't super comfortable yet with clients, like working with clients.
Yeah.
Because I hadn't had that opportunity a ton in those last two placements.
It's nice to have a bit of that clinical structure. I know sometimes with some of the newer therapists who join our practice, we're kind of like, well, you can work through this workbook with a client, right? Like
exactly
mind over mood or whatever it is. And that it just gives a jumping off point for everything. So you walk in there with a plan.
Yeah. Exactly. So I took that position. It was at Dalhousie in the International Chronic and Complex Conditions Research Group. Very long name, with Dr. Tanya Packer. So she was the director of the School of Health Administration at Dal, but she's actually also an occupational therapist, which is nice to see OTs in kind of some other big roles outside of OT. So as part of that research that we were doing there, one of the interventions that was being studied in that lab and that I was part of the team researching as well as like writing the manuscripts and stuff, was the Managing Fatigue program. So the Packer Managing Fatigue program. And that's a intervention for folks living with severe fatigue due to chronic conditions. And it's an OT intervention. It was actually developed by Dr. Packer and two other OTs, Adele and Nikki, back in 1995 for
Okay.
post-polio syndrome in a post-polio clinic they
Oh,
were working in. And those folks in that clinic had this extreme fatigue, and Nikki, Adele, and Tanya didn't really know there wasn't any good resources for them to use with them. So they worked on developing this managing fatigue protocol. It kind of integrates energy conservation, chronic disease self-management elements, and just like very pure OT, very occupation based into one 6-week protocol. So they developed that in 1995, started doing some research on it, and then other people started doing some research on it. So the first kind of bigger RCT with it was in 2005. And then from then on, people just kept researching, which is nice that we have research in the field of OT and
yeah.
in chronic disease management, but it never actually moved out of the research. People kept researching it and then not getting it into the hands of clinicians. It was very briefly in 95 published as a textbook that clinicians could use with like overhead
Right.
acetates and that sort of thing. Directed people to the smoking area of the hospital. And that went out of date pretty quickly, was out of
Sure.
print. And then after that went out of print in the 2000s, no one could use it with their clinicians. So, or with their clients. So then we were doing more research on it with Parkinson's and with multiple sclerosis. And there was some colleagues of ours in Europe who were working on it with neuromuscular diseases and post-polio and all these different conditions. And then long COVID became a problem.
I was
And
going to ask if this is an intervention that you've been using for that as well.
yeah, so there's been some research on it in the Netherlands. I haven't seen any publications yet. I haven't seen any
Okay.
results yet, but it was being researched in the Netherlands for long COVID. Um, but essentially, that led to a lot of therapists reaching out to either our research team or the research teams elsewhere that were using it and had publications with it listed. And these clinicians in real life practice were reaching out saying, hey, can we have this to use with our clients? We have nothing. Like, we don't know how to manage this long COVID, where
Yeah.
fatigue is kind of one of the main symptoms. And we were just researchers, so we didn't know
Right.
how to meet that need on a large scale. How are we going to train all of these clinicians? How are we going to get them the material to use with their clients? How are we going to get them manuals? And people are asking for these around the world. How are we going to translate them and validate them in all these languages? So we had like a group of researchers from different areas, and we were kind of thinking about it very much from a research lens. And then someone encouraged us to speak with the commercialization office at the university, because they were like, this is really more, if you're going to do this properly,
It's
this
business, not research.
exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we spoke to the commercialization office, and they recommended we do a program called Lab to Market, which is it's like a 4-month program where they take researchers and with a quote unquote product, train them in some kind of basic startup business skills. And you also do a bunch of customer discovery. So you're supposed to do 100 customer discovery interviews
And
where
by this, you mean surveys where you're finding out from customers, what are you interested in, how you would you
so
use this, etc.
direct conversations. Yeah.
Yeah.
So cold
So it's an
calling
interview.
people.
And were you cold calling? Sorry, I'm going to jump into all these details.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Were you cold calling therapists or were you cold calling clients?
Therapists at this
Okay.
point. It was therapists and so therapists, some insurance providers,
Okay.
some nurses as well,
And where did you
clinic
find their
administrators.
contact?
Pardon?
Where did you locate their contact information?
So I kind of
Yeah.
you make a bit of a web. So I started with my graduating class,
Okay.
who were all working in different places and in different
Yeah.
contexts. And then they had people that they knew, so one of the folks
Okay.
that graduated with me, she was working for Sun Life and in a emerging role there. So then she was able to make connections through that, and then just kind of making that network there. And then some of the more specific folks I knew I wanted to talk to that were
Right.
more like pure cold calls,
Right.
just found phone numbers on the
Just
internet
Google them and call.
or reached out
So,
on LinkedIn.
oh yes, LinkedIn is always handy for that stuff. If you
Exactly.
can get their attention.
Yes.
If they respond back.
Yes,
Yeah.
because LinkedIn, I have to admit, I often just go,
Yeah.
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
because I'm not interested in what other people have to say, just because you get so much information sometimes.
Absolutely.
So Michelle, can you give me some examples of the questions?
Yeah. So at that point, it was really validating that we were solving an actual problem that existed.
Yeah. Yeah.
We knew from the research that clients benefited from this intervention. But unfortunately, in the world of healthcare policy and business and all of that,
Yeah.
people don't care quite as much about the efficacy
Yeah.
if there's not also a time and money savings
Yeah.
element involved, which was hard to wrap our heads around as clinicians. And
So I'm so sorry, I'm about to interrupt you for a second again.
yeah,
I will do it a million more times. But at this point in time, was this sort of a project that you did sort of an offshoot on your own time, or was this a project that you were doing as a part of your work with the university?
yeah. So for that period of time, that program is funded by my tax.
Okay.
And so I had my tax funding to step away from the research work that I was doing for that time
Okay.
and focus on understanding, is there a problem here?
Right.
Okay.
Does it
Yeah.
need to be solved?
Right.
How do people want it to be solved, and will they pay for it? Right?
Can you tell people what my tax is, just for people that are listening?
Yeah. So
Okay.
my tax is a funding and also educational organization through its federal funding. And they fund a number of different kind of student projects. So if you're a business, you can hire with my tax funding a business student or a tech student to join your company. And it's kind of an educational opportunity for the student, as well as the company gets some work from
Right.
a motivated student during that period of time. Often the company has to match my taxes amount. And then there's also research projects that can be funded by my tax, where it's a research student, like a postdoc student or a PhD student or a master's student, and they have some funding to do research working alongside a company as well as with the university.
So the grant was provided to the university for your time.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So who owns the product?
So that's
I will come back to the questions in a minute, but I think
Absolutely.
you sort of
So
answered that when you said, is there a need? Will you use it? How much will you pay for it? How long does it have to be?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So then, yes, who owns
So
this
once we
thing?
incorporated, we did the lab to market program that finished in May of 2022. July 14th of 2022, we incorporated, and the intellectual property was assigned to the company.
Okay. And who makes up the company? Is it sort of a joint with you and the university? Is it a group of you from the university? Is this your own company?
Yeah, so there's myself and Dr. Tanya Packer were the co-founders. So
Okay.
we own the company separate from the university.
Mhm.
In order for research needs to be met and managing conflict of interest, Tanya is not a shareholder of the company.
Okay.
Because she still runs a research program, and that opens up a lot of doors for conflict of interest.
Yeah.
So as we started selling products, I also stepped away from the university and from research in order to maintain a distinction between the research that's ongoing and the
The
company itself.
product itself and the company.
And so at this point, I own 100% of the company, and it's an incorporation. So rather than, I know like the private practice that I work at in the evenings, that's a sole proprietorship.
Yeah.
We are an incorporation, so a separate legal entity. And at this point in time, I own 100%.
And is it like an occupational therapy corporation?
Nope. So we are technically a health tech startup.
Okay. Okay. So then here's a bit more of the question when we're talking about like ownership and profits and where things go and so on. So when you have profits,
Mhm.
since your co-founder sort of stepped away and is at the university, but is still a part of it, and here's just the intricacies, I guess, of your business and your business model, but who gets the profits? Where do they go?
Yeah, so this is kind of a distinction I often talk about when folks that run private practices are comparing a service-based company like a private practice to a tech-based company.
Yeah.
So we don't have profits. Most of
You're
our
in that
funding,
startup phase. It's still where
yeah.
you haven't
So
realized
we
profits yet.
have
Okay.
revenue, like we have revenue
Yeah.
coming in, we have sales, but we also have to pay to web developers
Yeah.
and a UX UI consultant, and we are building constantly and hosting server space and developing new applications, marketing, and then managing translations into other languages. So we don't have any profits at this time. Most
So,
of our funding comes from, well, all of our funding right now, up to this point, has been non-dilutive in nature. So
okay.
things like grants
Yeah.
and awards, with
Okay.
obviously some buffer coming in from revenue, but we're still operating on what we'd call like a minimum viable product in what we
Yeah.
sell. So it's not, up to this point, has not been particularly scalable. So it's not something we've been able to sell enough of
Yeah.
because every account that's created is manually being created by
For
me.
sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Um,
We have an app through our clinic and we're looking
yep,
at those different ways. And it's the same thing, right? Like
exactly.
we're not at a stage yet where we're ready to take the jump and just get it fully automated and monetized because that costs
Yep.
money. So it's still, you want to, okay, I'll enter you. So here's the big question then that a lot of people are going to be wondering. How do you buy groceries? Like, are you generating enough to cover your time, or are you
Mhm.
sort of in this stage where you're just doing the work on your own time and that evening private practice you do is what's paying the bills?
Yeah, so for the first year, before we had anything available, really, like we
Yeah.
had our quote unquote minimum viable product. That first year, I just did it on the side. Tanya and I kind of worked on it on the side. Um, we made this website on, we did it ourselves, like on Wix and
Yeah.
Moodle, and we taped them together and opened up e-commerce. And then January 2023, someone bought the product. I didn't even know we had e-commerce open yet. Like it wasn't
Yeah.
connected to a bank account. And someone bought it. And um, we were like, okay, we have to, maybe this isn't just something we are doing on the side. If
Yeah.
people, you know, we have to pick up the pace if people are going to start, or people want to start buying it.
And how did
Um,
that person buy it? Did they just Google you, do you think? You weren't promoting it, right?
no, we had an Instagram account. Um, One of the unique things and one of the big benefits for us is that the managing fatigue program, so that's what we started with, was just the managing fatigue program and licensing therapists to use it. That program was already in a number of clinical guidelines in Europe. It just
Mm.
wasn't available. And so that first customer was from Europe. Most of our customers are, because it's in the clinical guidelines for multiple sclerosis specifically. So my assumption has always been that that individual found it and then Googled
Right.
it, because
Right.
people, that's what people did before, right? When people were reaching out to Dr. Packer or to the researchers in the States or in Europe, they were reading the article and then Googling it and then finding the researchers' emails, right?
Right.
And once we had a website that had the same name, it started sending people that way. That's my assumption on how she found us, because we didn't know her.
Yeah. Okay, so then you did make a sale. You were at that
Right.
point where you realized I've got to do something, and then
So
you took the leap, but you still
at
need
that
to pay for groceries.
exactly. So we applied for a program called NERV through the Ontario Brain Institute,
Okay.
um, which provides $100,000 in non-dilutive funding to neurotech-based startups to
Okay.
fund kind of continued validation efforts. So we
Okay.
applied for that. did the application, did a pitch competition, and were accepted into that program. So that ended it was a year-long program. It ended this summer.
Okay.
So we started that and we incorporated 2022. We got into NERV and started NERV in 2023.
Okay.
Part of that 100,000 is required to go to the founder to be able to pay for their time to be able to take that jump.
Right.
So part of it was for that. And then also it funded some launch events and kind of user experience interviews with some of our early adopters in Europe, as well as our first developer and consultant to assist with user experience and product development.
Okay.
And then once we had the NERV funding, that we were able to leverage that into additional grant funding from other organizations. Like,
And are you writing the grants?
yes.
Okay.
That was the best reaction. It's so true. It's something I've never done. And I'm like, it must feel like a mountain. It must feel like you're climbing a mountain.
You get used to it, and eventually you end up with kind of a document, like a source document.
Right.
Most of the grant applications ask the same questions.
Right.
Right?
Copy paste.
And then once you get good at pitching, and doing formal pitches, then because most of those bigger funds involve pitch competitions. So
you're in person. It's like the Lions Den, whatever that's called.
Exactly.
Okay, that's kind of cool.
So Michelle, did you take because it's an art, right? Pitching is an art. To say things efficiently is a challenge, and you've got the benefit of being able to say, "Here, the research shows it. This is what the therapists tell us they want. This is what people want. So this is what we created. We know there's demand, and we know it works." Which is awesome. But where did you train, or how did you train yourself to be able to pitch? Because you don't have a lot of time.
Yeah.
You've got to grab people.
When we think about how I pay for groceries, I also teach dance. And then I work in a private practice 3 days a week, or 3 evenings a week.
Okay, so private practice, dance, and a little bit of funding from your grants.
Yeah, so I've kind of been able to leverage that onwards to pay for myself and my employees. And then, I do 2 evenings and a Saturday at a clinic, and then I teach dance, and that kind of, I work on the company kind of 9 to 4 each day. And then I'll see the kids at the clinic or at the studio after school time till 8 p.m.
Right.
And on Saturdays, on the weekends.
And sometimes you sleep too. Sometimes you sleep.
Yes, sometimes. But how did I get good at pitching? I think, so my first pitch, that NERV pitch, I prepared it on my own. And I think the fact that I grew up dancing, I was also a tour guide at the Citadel here in Halifax. And I just put that persona on. Treated it like, and I still do that. I still treat it like a performance. I'm acting something out, even though it is now my livelihood. But you can't let it get you stressed out. And then since that first pitch, I've worked. Pitch feedback is like social currency in the startup world. So we had a really great mentor with one of the federal government agencies who helped prepare us for a pitch. I went to a program in Silicon Valley, and we did a bunch of pitch work there. Then every investor, every mentor, everyone that you talk to wants to see your pitch deck and then provides feedback on it. And then every time you submit a pitch or do a pitch competition, you typically get feedback as well.
Okay. Yeah, and for those who are sort of wondering what the challenges are with pitches, I think it's because you have to choose every word so wisely, because you've only got so much time, and you've got to make your audience think that your idea is not only worth their time and effort and listening to. These people hear pitches
Exactly.
all the time. And they're not out there to be kind and to help you. They're out there to generate income for
Yeah.
themselves or their
Yeah.
company, right? They're there for profit. So this is why sort of the pitching idea is you just got to get everything out there so quickly and so efficiently that
Yeah.
it's an art. So
Yeah.
for those who are thinking about pitching, and if you do it and you tank, don't worry. Most people do for the first
Oh,
while.
yeah.
You just had wonderful success to begin with, which is fabulous.
And I would definitely say, like, I watched a lot of pitches
Yeah,
Mm.
before, like in that first year when, we weren't really doing much. This was kind of on the side, that just a little thing we were working on. I
yeah,
went in, like, when I could, I went to local pitch competitions and I watched pitches on YouTube,
Mm.
because you're going to see people tank and you're going to
yeah,
see really good pitches, and that like helps you figure out,
yeah,
okay, I want to start with a story like that, or I want to make sure I don't get too deep into the technical weeds because I didn't understand a word that engineer was saying, so I don't want to be the be the
yes,
same as that. Um, so definitely seeing lots of pitches and not like watching Shark's Tank or Dragon's Den, because that's all a very uh just
Staged. It feels a
yeah,
bit staged.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, watching a lot also really helped.
And
yeah.
can
That
you
makes a lot of
reiterate,
sense.
you commented, sorry, you commented
Mhm.
on going to Silicon Valley. So that was like, can you tell us again what that was?
Yeah, so that was with the Canadian Women's Network, which is an organization based in San Francisco, and their role is basically to connect Canadian-based female founders with the Silicon Valley-based tech and startup.
Investors. Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Investors and resources and things like that. So we were sent a link about it, and I ignored it initially because I was like, that sounds like an insane thing. I don't need to go to Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
And then it just like the Google invite popped up for a like to go to the webinar to learn more. So I was
right.
like, okay, let's learn about it. So I learned about it, and at that point in time, we were really in a phase of trying to figure out, okay, we've been getting these grants, these pitch competitions, but to continue scaling, we're kind of now have to decide if we want to go the dilutive funding route, so the investor route, or keep kind of writing these grant applications, getting this
Yeah,
bucket of money and then this bucket of
yeah,
money
Right.
for specific projects. So we didn't know. Tanya and I were both very concerned about going the investor route or the venture capital route, because we wanted the core mission and premise of the company to be about taking chronic disease self-management research and getting it into clinicians' hands, right?
Right.
you don't
And we
want
didn't
that diluted by,
exactly.
it was more
Certain
So
the
investors with
clinical
certain
end
other
goal.
motives,
Yeah,
that kind of
exactly.
thing.
So we
Okay.
didn't know if we wanted to do that. And everything we were being told locally, so like in Nova Scotia, was very much the only way you can do it is if you go to the venture capital firms. You need to go to the venture capital
Mm.
firms. And we
mm,
just didn't feel right. That didn't sit right with us. So I was like, let's go. It has a whole section on all this educational stuff on
yeah,
what venture capital is, how to pitch to venture capitalists, other investment options. So I was able to get, again, some My Tax funding to attend. It was a 3-day kind of course, as well as meeting with investors. And it was exactly what we needed,
Hmm.
because I got to learn a whole bunch from people with much different perspectives than everyone that's just
yeah,
in Nova Scotia, and this is the one route that everyone takes.
Yes.
Um, and here, no, like you don't have to do venture capital. There's this type of investor, and there's
right.
impact investors. And I got to pitch to these huge, like one-on-one to these huge Silicon Valley based investors, get feedback on not just our pitch, but on our company. And I knew they weren't going to invest in me.
Right.
The people I was pitching to, they're
Yeah,
looking for billion-dollar
yeah,
exits, right? And they knew they weren't going to invest in me. So it allowed us to kind of remove almost that power dynamic that you sometimes feel when you're talking to funders or investors, and just have an open conversation, and me to express like my concerns, and them to be able to say, look at this, like think of it this way. I think this part of your company is good. I think this part you need to consider if you want to go that route. And we came away with it with a much better pitch and a lot more confidence, but also this more nuanced idea of you can go the dilutive investment route without going to these big venture capital. Like there's another option. You can be strategic in your partners and in your investors, and ultimately, you want their money, but you're also providing them an opportunity. So don't
Did that,
make
it sounds
yourself
like you learned
smaller.
so much from that experience, Michelle. Was there anything from that feedback that you took that in any way changed your trajectory, other than who you could ask for money from?
Yeah.
Did your product change? Did anything about your model or anything there shift?
In terms of the like business model, no.
Okay.
I think, there were fairly minimal folks there with experience in this type of healthcare. No one knows what occupational therapy is.
Right.
And that's the same in
Not here, not
Silicon
Silicon Valley, not on Mars. Yeah.
But it did kind of point us in the direction of, all right, let's try to raise some dilutive capital. Let's try to find some strategic partners and grow. Whereas if we were continuing down the non-dilutive grant funding route, we kind of would have had to plateau, right?
It's an academic kind of a
Exactly.
venture at that point.
Exactly.
So Michelle, this is fabulous, but I also wanted to ask you a little bit more about like the actual operations and the setup and the platform. And we're talking so much about all these things, which I want to hear more about, and we don't have time. So I'm going to change the topic.
I love it.
So first of all, just to sort of summarize some of that whole development, finding investors, grant stage, and so on, it sounds like it was almost a situation where one thing led to the other. But again, nothing happens overnight, right? It's just this sort of slow development. You have an idea and you have to explore and investigate, and you're accessing a lot of different resources. And there's a similarity there because I'm actually this afternoon starting a course called Ignition with Invest Ottawa, which is also related to some of our health tech, not the app, but some other stuff. So that's just to say to our listeners that there are a lot of resources out there that are funded by, one of the different levels of governments that you can access. So super helpful to start going in those directions before you get started. Because if anything, talking to you sort of reminds us that you want to open up a clinic, that's fine. Start, you get a client, you can go. You want to start with health tech or an actual product, that's a whole different venture. And you're not going to be up and running in 2 days.
Right.
So just to allow yourself to take the time. Am I correct here in what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And those, like, we've had really great support from Invest Nova Scotia. The Center for Women in Business is they're based in Halifax, but they're Canada wide.
Yeah.
They have some funding and they have really great programs and courses as well. There's a ton of those groups that are out there with non-dilutive funding, and you want to use that non-dilutive funding as long as you can, as long as you possibly can.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
Okay, so then you've gone through all this. I know we're a little bit further down the road, but then backing up, where is it hosted? What does it look like? Who is your team? And then marketing, growth, all those things in like 5 minutes.
Yeah. So
I'm just kidding.
we started so minimum viable product was Wix, was on Wix, because the Wix ads on YouTube told me that you can do it yourself. So we had Wix and we had Moodle. So we had a CMS, which had the e-commerce feature. Clinicians or the clinic itself could purchase on Wix. Once that purchase came through, I would enroll them in the online course. Once they were done the course, back on Wix was all the resources that for them to access for themselves as well as for their clients.
And the course was what you wrote during the research project.
Yeah, so I didn't write it. It's existed for some time. But
you were granted access by the university. You could use this.
Yeah, so Dalhousie is interesting in that the university does not, if you're a principal investigator, a professor,
Yeah.
you own your own IP. So Dalhousie,
Oh,
and this was not developed at Dalhousie. This was developed back in the 90s in a clinic. So the university actually never owned the core IP. They've owned pieces that we haven't
right.
used for like there's like an asynchronous version
Yeah.
that was developed for a study. We don't use that. We don't own that. The core IP was owned by the three original authors, and that was
Okay.
assigned to our company
Okay. So
at
are
that
you
time.
having to pay them for use of this,
We
of the course?
know so those three OTs, um, they just wanted it out there
Oh, okay.
in the world,
Okay.
Great. Yeah.
and were for the most part retired,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
hadn't two of them hadn't thought of it in
Yeah.
since 2005.
Right.
And so I think there was like a $1, like a nominal
Right.
value that was assigned over um, to the company, and very specific in, we own this part of it that we use to
Right.
commercialize. We don't own the body of research. We don't own the stuff that's been
Yeah.
developed as part of different research projects or that other researchers have developed based off of this.
Right.
But the core IP, the original IP or background IP, is what was assigned to us.
So
Okay.
an OT logs in, they take this course, they're
Yep.
certified, they get access probably to a manual, to resources.
Exactly. Manuals, worksheets, kind of PowerPoints, things like that.
Right.
Symptom tracking stuff for the client. We don't collect that data, but so they get that, and then it's on an annual renewal basis. So if someone changes practices, they don't need to, they don't need to renew it. And that's the funding model we went with, or the
Okay.
payment
So,
model.
so theoretically, when you're up and running and fully generating profit, how do you generate profit? Is this a subscription, like a membership every year that
Yeah.
you pay to maintain your certification?
Exactly. So we have individual licenses that individual clinicians can purchase themselves. And then we have organizational licenses. So we're about
Okay.
50-50. So about 50% of our paid users right
That
now
is
are
helpful. I've got to tell
individual.
you, for an organization license, because in some of the other therapy worlds, you have to pay individual for everyone, regardless
Yes,
of whether you've got a clinical practice. So you've
Right.
got a clinical
exactly.
practice of 15 therapists, and it's just unaffordable.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that's a great idea to have
A
organizational options as
combination.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have both options, and it's about 50-50 in what people choose right now.
Yeah.
Um, and then yeah, there's an annual renewal. That's a lesser amount than the original
Yeah.
upfront payment, because the original upfront payment includes the training.
And
Um,
the
and then
course
the
and the
annual renewal
resources.
is just for continued access to the platform. And then
Okay.
that was the tech we used originally. We are now a couple weeks, hopefully 2 weeks, but I don't want to jinx it with what the
Okay.
where the developers are going.
By the time this airs, hopefully.
Yes,
Yes. Yeah.
absolutely. By the time this airs, we'll be up on like our fully coded platform that it's all integrated in. We built it from I say we, but our team built it from the ground up, and that is all details. It's hosted on Azure, like on a
Okay.
cloud server.
Okay.
When we do start
Mm.
dabbling in
Mobile friendly as well?
mobile friendly, yep. So
Mm.
it's fully responsive. Um, and then we're looking at potentially going into the mobile app space. If there's mobile
Right.
app with patient data, we'll probably get our own server based in Canada
Yeah.
for patient data. But at this time, we're on a cloud.
Could you give us an idea of who your team is? Because you've referenced different software developers and so on.
Absolutely. So our team, kind of our operational team, is myself. We have a lead developer.
Okay.
So he's a web developer. We have a second developer as well who has a bit more experience with mobile. And then we have a marketing manager.
Okay.
And then we also have a product development UX UI lead, but that is on a contract basis as opposed to an employee basis.
Okay, so these are full-time employees.
Yes, the first three along with myself. And then we have an advisory board as well.
Okay.
That's a joint research and business advisory board. So we have Tanya Packer, as well as doctors Edith Kupp, who is based in the Netherlands, and Eva Manson Lexell, who's in Sweden. and they are OTs in those regions, but also researchers and professors.
Okay.
So they kind of, those three guide our research, and then Denise Stevens, who's a business mentor on our advisory board.
Okay. And then when you connected with these people, was it sort of a networking process or worldwide, or were you, running interviews more locally?
Yeah, so for the employees, they're all local.
Okay.
And just, posted on Indeed,
Yeah.
Okay.
did our
Interviewed, did the
interviews.
whole. Mhm.
Okay.
Exactly. And
Okay.
then the advisory board were researchers who were already researching this program and who had been part of those initial discussions on, okay, people are
Mm.
asking us for them, how do we get it out?
Yeah.
And then Denise is a mentor we were paired with in Lab to Market early on.
Okay.
Um, and she was really helpful at helping us start to shift our mind from occupational therapist, researcher to running a business and getting comfortable with that idea. And she's kind of come along for the ride.
Is it
Okay.
a volunteer board, Michelle?
Yes.
Or
Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
So then, knowing that you've got that business support is fantastic because now I know that you're also looking at marketing, growth, how you're going to scale it. Your previous model was not scalable.
Yeah.
What you said, what you've got going on now in the next couple of weeks, hopefully, is scalable. So then, how are you moving forward with marketing and growth plans?
Yeah. So up until this past spring, summer, we were not doing any marketing really, other than we would do some events with professional associations. So the Swedish Association of OTs, the
Mm,
Dutch Association, um, the Slovenian Association. So, we would do that type of marketing, but we knew that
yeah,
that was as much as we could handle because we couldn't grow
Right.
yeah,
bigger with our MVP. And then this summer, as we went into the summer looking ahead, okay, we're scaling up. How are we going to plan for that?
yeah.
We had some funding to work with a marketing consultant over 5 months. Um, so we worked with Allison over the summer and through parts of the fall to build a marketing strategy within
Okay.
that B2B, business to business
Yeah.
type space. So we worked with her to build a strategy and then hired a kind of Rebecca. She's newer to the marketing world. She's like a marketing manager, but she's newer, and so we were able to kind of have an overlap between their roles to onboard Rebecca onto our marketing strategy. Um, we use it's a multi-channel strategy, so
Right.
a little bit on socials, but we know that that's not going to be the biggest place that the
Yeah.
payer is coming from, but
Yeah.
OTs are on there and the
Yeah.
OTs are going to ask. So social media, a newsletter that kind of keeps us in the research space, um, and then really trying to, and this is more work for me, I guess, but those associations and societies are really key. So going to
Yeah.
conferences, having a booth, talking to clinicians, and
Being
then
on a podcast.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And you're accessing funding right now through grants and so on
Correct,
to do the traveling.
correct.
Okay. And I'm going to throw it over to Seema in about 2 seconds, but I just wanted to clarify for those listening because we've mentioned MVP several times
Mhm.
throughout this. And the idea of minimum viable product is literally you just put together your idea in the most minimal way
Mhm.
possible, right? And then you
Yeah,
just slap it up there, throw it out to the market, and you see what happens. So you don't want to invest too much time. So it's almost like product testing. And then
yeah.
based on the feedback you receive from the MVP, then you can decide, okay, do I want to move forward? Do I need to make changes? Or this idea just a bust and we need to let it go. So that's kind of the idea
Exactly.
behind MVP.
Thank you for that, Sherry. That was actually really helpful. I was wondering too. MVP has a different connotation in my world.
Yes.
So
It's not most valuable product.
Michelle, so to take us out, this has been such an interesting story, such a unique
Mm-hmm.
path, even from just experiencing virtual placements through COVID to where you are now. Can you tie it back to occupational therapy for us? So how
Yeah.
has this experience, this ongoing path that you're on, influenced or impacted your practice?
Yeah, I think what it's really given me is the opportunity to have a much wider view of what occupational therapy is.
Mm,
Um, and so because I get to speak as part of customer discovery, as part of marketing efforts, I'm speaking to occupational therapists, professors, all around the world, in Singapore, in Europe, in the US, and seeing models of care that are being used there, seeing interventions that are being used there, seeing how the education programs are different there, has helped me it has helped me stay on top of what, best practices are in different regions, what the research is saying, but also different like frameworks of practice that, are going to influence our company, but also make it so that when I'm going to clinic in the evenings, I'm not getting into I think it's easy when you're seeing the same type of folks to get into a rut with the care you're providing, and maybe not adapting to the most recent research and most up-to-date modalities and methods. And my role in the business space forces me to do that. Which is nice.
Well, that's wonderful. We are wishing you much success, and we're going to have to reconnect and hear how this unfolds and see where you are able to take it. Thank you so much for joining us today.
So interesting, Michelle. Thank you.
We hope you are as fascinated by Michelle's private practice journey as we are. She shared some wonderful resources that we have listed for you in our episode description. Join us next week when we chat with an OT who has been in the business for over 40 years, Rona Feldstein. Subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and share this series with your network.